After 15 years of working my way up at First National Mortgage, I finally saved enough for my dream home. The Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood had everything I wanted: beautiful tree-lined streets, meticulously maintained common areas, and homes that radiated both elegance and warmth. The day I received the keys felt like the culmination of every late night and weekend I had sacrificed to build my career in mortgage banking. My moving truck pulled through the ornate stone entrance on a perfect spring morning. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or collected their mail. Two children rode bikes along the sidewalk, their laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. For someone who had grown up in crowded apartment buildings, this sense of space and tranquility felt almost unreal. The three-bedroom colonial with its white columns and red brick exterior stood proudly at the end of Maple Drive, and I could hardly believe it was mine. The welcome packet from the Homeowners Association arrived the next day. I read through the bylaws with genuine interest. The rules seemed reasonable: guidelines for landscaping, exterior paint colors, holiday decorations, and trash collection. Having structure made sense to maintain the aesthetic appeal that had drawn me here in the first place. I eagerly signed the membership papers and wrote my first dues check. That weekend, the HOA hosted a welcome barbecue at the community clubhouse. I put on a casual button-down shirt and khakis, eager to meet my new neighbors. The gathering was lively, with about 40 residents mingling around tables loaded with potluck dishes. Everyone seemed friendly, introducing themselves and offering tips about local services and restaurants. Then the crowd subtly shifted, making way for a woman in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair and an expensive-looking tennis outfit. Even before anyone mentioned her name, I could tell she held some authority by how conversations hushed when she approached. This was Karen Blackwell, HOA president for the past 6 years. "So nice of you to join us," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she gave me a quick once-over. "You must be in the Jensen property. Are you just renting, or did you actually buy the place?" The question caught me off guard. I had been chatting with neighbors for nearly an hour, clearly introducing myself as the new homeowner. "I purchased the home," I responded politely. "Closed last week. It is a wonderful neighborhood." Karen nodded, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Well, we have very specific standards here at Oak Ridge. Renters typically do not understand the investment homeowners have made. I hope you plan to maintain the property appropriately." I showed her my business card indicating my position as senior loan officer. "I understand property values quite well. In fact, I specialize in mortgage lending for luxury communities exactly like this one." "How nice," she replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but nice. Her eyes darted to my business card without taking it. "Well, you should know we take our covenants very seriously here, not like those apartment complexes downtown." I had never mentioned living in an apartment before. The assumption stung, but I maintained my composure. "I assure you, I am fully committed to being a responsible homeowner and good neighbor." Karen excused herself to greet someone else, but throughout the evening, I noticed her watching me from across the patio. When I complimented the landscaping to another board member, Karen interjected loudly that new residents often had trouble adhering to the aesthetic standards. When I mentioned plans to plant rose bushes, she immediately cited 3 bylaws about approved flora. As the party wound down, I helped stack chairs while nearby neighbors whispered. One older gentleman named Frank approached me as I prepared to leave. "Do not take it personally," he said quietly. "Karen tends to be particular about who she thinks belongs here. Just keep your head down and your lawn perfect." Walking home in the fading twilight, the excitement of my new beginning was tempered by an uncomfortable realization. In the perfect community I had worked so hard to join, someone had already decided I did not quite fit. The first notice appeared on my door 3 days after I moved in. A yellow paper tucked into a clear plastic sleeve informed me that my garbage can had remained visible from the street outside of designated collection hours. I checked the HOA regulations and confirmed bins could be placed out after 6 p.m. the day before collection. Mine had been out at 7 p.m. I dismissed it as an overzealous welcome gesture and made a note to be more careful. A week later, another notice arrived citing unapproved vegetation in front landscaping. The offending plants were 3 rosemary bushes the previous owner had planted years ago, according to Frank, who had lived across the street. For 20 years, those same bushes had never been an issue before. By the 4th week, the notices arrived with concerning regularity. My grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall. The natural mulch I used was not the approved color. The American flag I hung by my front door was improperly positioned. Each violation came with increasing fine recommendations. One evening, while watering my disputed rosemary, my next-door neighbor Sarah stopped to chat. She glanced nervously around before speaking. "Listen, I should probably tell you something. At the last board meeting before you moved in, Karen made some comments when your purchase application came through." I turned down the hose. "What kind of comments?" "She researched you online and told everyone you were probably using this as a rental property investment. She said your type, her words, not mine, were ruining the neighborhood character." Sarah looked genuinely uncomfortable. Several of us disagreed with her, but Karen has a way of controlling the conversation. That explained the renter comments and heightened scrutiny. "Thank you for telling me," I said, trying to mask my growing frustration. The following Tuesday brought the monthly HOA meeting at the community center. I arrived early and took a seat in the middle row. Karen sat at the central table with 4 other board members, not acknowledging my presence until she reached the violations section of the agenda. "Moving on to compliance issues," she announced, shuffling papers importantly. "We have several properties with outstanding notices, most notably 42 Maple Drive, where our new resident seems to have difficulty understanding our standards." "Excuse me," I raised my hand politely. "I am the owner of 42 Maple Drive, not a renter, and I have addressed each issue within 24 hours of notification." Karen smiled thinly. "Yes, well, renters or temporary owners often struggle with our established community practices. Perhaps apartment living is more suitable for some lifestyles." Several neighbors looked uncomfortable. I felt heat rising in my face but maintained my professional demeanor. "For the record, I am the legal owner and have no intention of renting the property. I take pride in my home and have complied with all legitimate requests." "Moving on," Karen continued as if I had not spoken. "The property at 42 Maple also needs to submit proper documentation for any external modifications." The meeting continued in this vein, with Karen repeatedly referring to me as the renter at 42 Maple, despite my corrections. By the time the meeting adjourned, my polite facade was cracking. 2 days later, while reviewing loan portfolios at work, I came across a familiar address that made me stop cold. The screen displayed 67 Oak Ridge Lane, Karen Blackwell's primary residence. Not only did our bank hold her mortgage, but it was specifically in the luxury home portfolio I personally oversaw. Curious, I checked our database and discovered something even more surprising. Karen owned 3 additional properties in the neighborhood, all mortgaged through First National, all within my division. Further review revealed something concerning. Each mortgage had been approved sequentially over the past 4 years, with each application showing increasingly optimistic income projections. The most recent investment property had been approved just 6 months ago with income statements that seemed suspiciously inflated compared to her previous applications. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. The woman who had been harassing me for weeks, questioning my credentials and homeownership, was financially extended across 4 properties managed by my department. The woman who kept treating me like an unwelcome outsider had her entire real estate portfolio sitting in my professional jurisdiction. That evening, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset, contemplating the situation. The ethical part of me wanted to continue addressing Karen's harassment through proper HOA channels and committee appeals. The vengeful part wanted to immediately flag her accounts for review. Neither approach felt entirely right. As darkness fell over Oak Ridge Estates, I made a decision to continue taking the high road, at least for now. But I would document everything moving forward, both personally and professionally. Karen Blackwell had no idea who she was really dealing with, and I hoped she would never need to find out. By midsummer, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. What began as petty harassment had evolved into something much more sinister. During a casual conversation at the community pool, I overheard 2 neighbors discussing the renter problem on Maple Drive. When they noticed me, they quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact. Karen had apparently been busy. Not content with targeting me through official channels, she had begun a whisper campaign, a courting. To Frank, who had become my unofficial neighborhood ally, Karen had told several residents that I was just renting temporarily and probably running some kind of business out of the house. Both claims were completely false but difficult to publicly refute without seeming defensive. The isolation tactics worked effectively. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings stopped. When I walked my newly adopted rescue dog each evening, certain neighbors would abruptly turn and walk in the opposite direction. Children who once waved enthusiastically now hurried inside when I passed. Then came the certified letter. The official HOA envelope contained a notice of a $2,500 fine for repeated and willful violations of community standards. The letter cited incidents I had never been previously notified about: unauthorized gatherings, a single housewarming with 6 guests, commercial activity taking work calls on my front porch, and creating a nuisance, my dog allegedly barking excessively, though he rarely barked at all. Most alarming was the final paragraph, which mentioned the possibility of a property lien if the fine remained unpaid. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, though I suspected most had simply followed Karen's lead without investigating. I was in my front yard that Saturday, planting approved flowers in precisely the formation dictated by HOA landscaping guidelines, when the confrontation finally happened. Karen marched up my driveway flanked by 2 board members I recognized from meetings. All 3 carried clipboards. "We have received additional complaints about this property," Karen announced loudly, clearly intending for the entire street to hear. She wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat as if performing for an audience. "The unapproved landscaping must be removed immediately." I stood slowly, removing my gardening gloves. "These are the exact flowers listed in the approved plant guide, planted in the formation shown in the landscaping template. I have the guidelines right here." I pointed to the laminated HOA document lying next to my garden tools. "The guidelines were updated last week," Karen countered, "though I had received no notification of any changes. Additionally, Renters are required to have all exterior modifications approved by both the property owner and the board. As I have stated repeatedly, I am the owner of this home, not a renter, I said, my voice controlled despite my rising anger. I have the mortgage documents and deed to prove it. Karen laughed dismissively. Anyone can print papers from the internet. Real homeowners understand our community. They respect tradition. This persistent defiance proves what everyone already knows. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. The other stared studiously at her clipboard. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked, standing my ground. Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping slightly but still easily audible to anyone nearby. "This is a community of established homeowners who care about property values and neighborhood character. People like you who rent temporarily or buy beyond their means always cause problems. Apartments and condos exist for a reason." The implication was clear and cutting. Despite my professional success and legitimate homeownership, I was being labeled as an outsider who did not belong. The familiar sting of exclusion washed over me, but this time, instead of shame, I felt something different: resolve. "You will receive formal notice of additional violations next week," Karen concluded, turning to leave. "I suggest you reconsider whether this community is the right fit for someone like you." That night, I could not sleep. The confrontation replayed in my mind alongside memories of every slight and accusation since moving in. At 2 a.m., I sat in my home office reviewing documents. Karen had not just been harassing me. She had been systematically blocking my attempts to fully integrate into the community. My application to join the neighborhood gardening committee denied without explanation. My permit request to install security cameras lost in processing. My offer to host a block party rejected for scheduling conflicts. Each decision bore Karen's influence. More disturbingly, I discovered that Karen had leveraged her various properties against each other in what appeared to be a precarious financial arrangement. Her primary residence had been refinanced twice to purchase the investment properties. The most recent mortgage application showed income that would require her to earn nearly double what her LinkedIn profile suggested was possible at her mid-level insurance company position. The following week brought the final community meeting before the summer break. I prepared a measured, reasonable presentation addressing the pattern of harassment. During the open forum, I calmly presented documentation of addressed violations and fair treatment going forward. Karen let me speak for precisely 2 minutes before interrupting. "Perhaps in whatever apartment complex you came from, this sort of behavior was acceptable," she said with practiced condescension. "But in Oak Ridge Estates, we have standards. If you find our community expectations too demanding, there are certainly more appropriate neighborhoods elsewhere." The room fell silent. Several neighbors looked at their shoes. No one spoke up, not even those who had privately expressed support. In that moment of public humiliation, something fundamentally changed inside me. The diplomatic mortgage banker who always followed protocol was replaced by someone with clear-eyed determination. I gathered my documents without another word and walked out. The professional line I had carefully maintained between my work knowledge and personal situation had just been erased by Karen herself. If she wanted to make this about belonging and property rights, she had chosen the wrong opponent. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Karen Blackwell had no idea who she was truly dealing with, but she was about to find out. The mortgage banker she had been tormenting was done playing defense. My home office became command central for what I now thought of as Operation Truth. I approached the situation with the same methodical precision I applied to complex mortgage applications. This was no longer about personal vindication, but about exposing systematic abuse of power. First, I reviewed Karen's mortgage files with professional thoroughness. As a senior loan officer with legitimate oversight of her accounts, I had every right to conduct a standard portfolio review. What I found confirmed my suspicions. On her most recent mortgage application for the fourth property, a townhouse on the east side of the neighborhood, Karen had claimed an annual income of $225,000 as a regional insurance director. Her LinkedIn profile and public records, however, listed her position as senior claims specialist at a mid-sized insurance company. More concerning were the discrepancies in asset verification. For each successive property purchase, Karen had listed the equity in her previous properties as primary collateral. Standard procedure, except she had systematically overvalued each property by 15–20%, creating a house of cards where each mortgage depended on inflated valuations of the others. I documented everything meticulously, being careful to access only information relevant to a legitimate portfolio review. Ethics still mattered, even when dealing with someone who had none. The next phase required more delicate work. I needed to establish that Karen's behavior toward me was not isolated, but part of a pattern. This required talking with other residents who might have experienced similar treatment. I started with Frank, the elderly gentleman who had warned me on my first day. Over coffee at his kitchen table, he shared how Karen had forced him to remove his beloved bird feeding station 3 years ago, claiming it attracted nuisance wildlife, though no such prohibition existed in the bylaws. When he protested, mysterious violations began appearing on his door until he removed it. "I am 82 years old," Frank said, his hands wrapping around his coffee mug. "I do not have the energy to fight with that woman. My wife loved watching the Cardinals before she passed. That little bit of joy was not worth the harassment." The more people I spoke with, the clearer the pattern became. The Rodriguez family had been denied permission to install a wheelchair ramp for their aging mother, ostensibly for aesthetic concerns, until they threatened legal action. The Patels had been repeatedly cited for cooking odors after hosting family gatherings. The young couple on Elm Street had been forced to repaint their front door after using a shade of blue that was technically within guidelines but not Karen's personal preference. Each story followed the same trajectory: arbitrary rule enforcement, escalation when questioned, personal attacks, and eventual submission or departure. 6 families had actually sold their homes and moved away in the past 2 years alone, unable to withstand Karen's targeted campaign against them. I compiled every account, creating a comprehensive documentation of systematic abuse of power. Particularly troubling was how Karen weaponized the HOA structure to pursue what appeared to be personal vendettas. Board meeting minutes revealed that violation notices required full board approval, yet neighbors reported receiving citations with only Karen's signature. This suggested she was acting unilaterally while presenting the harassment as official board action. The investigation was taking its toll. Late nights reviewing documents and conducting discreet interviews left me exhausted. The constant stress of living under scrutiny affected my sleep and concentratio. And each day brought new anxieties about what fresh violation might appear on my door. After 3 weeks of investigation, I needed guidance. I contacted James, a trusted colleague and the bank's compliance officer, asking to meet off-site. At a quiet cafe 20 miles from our neighborhood, I presented my findings without revealing my personal connection. "I have a professional ethical dilemma," I began, explaining the situation in hypothetical terms. If a client has demonstrably falsified financial information on mortgage applications, but I discovered this while conducting a portfolio review prompted by personal knowledge, what is the appropriate course of action? James listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. This is complicated, he admitted. The discovery of potential fraud requires reporting regardless of how the information came to light. However, the personal connection creates an appearance of conflict of interest. What would you recommend? I asked. Document everything thoroughly. Submit the findings through proper channels with full disclosure of any potential conflicts. Recuse yourself from the formal investigation, but fulfill your obligation to report potential fraud. He paused, studying my face. This is not hypothetical, is it? I did not answer directly. One more question. If a person in a position of authority is systematically abusing that power to harass and discriminate against residents, but those residents fear retaliation if they speak up individually, what would you advise? James considered this carefully. Sometimes systems only work when someone who understands them stands up to those abusing them. But whatever you do, make absolutely certain you follow protocol to the letter. Walking back to my car, I felt a strange sense of clarity. There was a right way and a wrong way to address this situation. Karen had chosen intimidation and deceit. I would choose transparency and procedure, but with strategic precision that she never saw coming. Creating an effective strategy required thinking several moves ahead, like an intricate chess game. I needed to address both the HOA abuse of power and the potential mortgage fraud without compromising my professional ethics or appearing vindictive. The plan had to be meticulous, documented, and absolutely by the book. I began by drafting a formal letter to the bank's ethics committee, outlining my findings regarding the 4 properties in question, without initially identifying my personal connection to the neighborhood. The letter detailed specific discrepancies in income reporting, asset valuation, and potential misrepresentation across multiple applications. I concluded by disclosing my residence in the same community and requesting appropriate oversight to ensure unbiased investigation. The letter would be held in reserve, my nuclear option if other approaches failed. Before taking such a drastic step, I needed to address the HOA situation directly. My dining room table became covered with HOA bylaws, meeting minutes, and violation notices collected from multiple residents. A clear pattern emerged. While the written rules required due process for violations, including written warnings before fines and appeals procedures, Karen had systematically bypassed these protections for targeted residents. I created a comprehensive spreadsheet documenting every violation issued under Karen's presidency, categorized by type, resident, and outcome. The data revealed that certain homeowners received immediate fines for infractions that others received only warnings for. Statistical analysis showed that newer residents received 340% more violations during their first year than established homeowners for identical issues. The next phase required building alliances. I began with Frank, whose respect in the community ran deep. Over the following 2 weeks, I held small, private meetings with residents who had experienced Karen's targeting. The Rodriguez family hosted our first strategic gathering under the guise of a dinner party. "What you are describing is exactly what happened to us," Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed as I outlined my findings. "We nearly moved because of the wheelchair ramp situation. My mother cried for days thinking she was causing problems. I have been afraid to plant anything in my garden for 2 years," added Mrs. Chen from across the table. "Every time I try, Karen finds some violation. The question becomes, what are we willing to do about it? I asked the group. Filing individual complaints has proven ineffective. We need collective action. The room fell silent until Frank spoke up. I am tired of living in fear in my own neighborhood. Count me in. One by one, each person agreed to stand together. By the third meeting, our alliance had grown to 14 households, representing nearly a quarter of the community. Each brought additional documentation of selective enforcement and harassment. We need to be absolutely clear, I emphasized during each gathering. This is not about revenge. This is about restoring fairness and proper procedure. Everything we do must be by the book, documented and professionally presented. We developed a three-phase plan. First, submit a formal petition outlining governance concerns signed by multiple residents. Second, present documented evidence of bylaw violations by the current leadership at the next HOA meeting. Third, call for a special election under the rarely invoked Section 8 of the Community Charter, which permitted leadership recall with support from 20% of homeowners. Meanwhile, I continued my professional due diligence. I submitted a routine portfolio review request for properties in our neighborhood, including but not limited to Karen's holdings. This would trigger a standard compliance check without appearing targeted or personal. As our plan took shape, I prepared multiple contingencies. If Karen attempted to block our petition, we had identified 3 separate bylaw provisions guaranteeing homeowners' right to be heard. If she tried to adjourn the meeting prematurely, we had parliamentary procedures ready to prevent it. If she claimed procedural issues, we had the HOA attorney's previous opinions contradicting her interpretation. The most delicate question remained: when and how to reveal my professional connection to Karen's mortgages. Strategically, this information would be most effective at a critical moment when Karen was already on the defensive about HOA abuses. Used too early, it might appear as a personal attack. Used too late, it might seem like an afterthought. We are not doing anything wrong, I reminded our group during our final planning session. We are simply ensuring the rules apply equally to everyone, including those who enforce them. The night before the scheduled HOA meeting, I meticulously organized 3 separate folders. The green folder contained the community petition and documentation of selective enforcement. The blue folder held parliamentary procedures and bylaw provisions guaranteeing our right to speak. And the red folder, the one I hoped not to need, contained redacted but clear evidence of Karen's mortgage discrepancies, revealing her financial house of cards without exposing confidential details. I placed the folders in my briefcase alongside copies of every violation notice I had received. Whatever happened tomorrow would change the community permanently. Karen had created a neighborhood ruled by intimidation and favoritism. Our goal was not to destroy her, but to restore balance and fairness. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with text messages from our alliance members. Ready for tomorrow. Standing with you. Time for change. A community was finding its voice again. The community center parking lot was unusually full that evening. Typically, HOA meetings drew 15 to 20 residents at most. Tonight, nearly 60 people filed in, creating a low buzz of anticipation. Our alliance had spread the word effectively but discreetly. The turnout sent a clear message before a single word was spoken. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by the other board members. She faltered momentarily upon seeing the crowd, then quickly composed herself. I sat in the middle row, my briefcase on my lap, watching her scan the room with growing suspicion. "We have a full agenda tonight," she began crisply after calling the meeting to order. so we will need to limit discussion time. The meeting proceeded through standard reports and updates. When Karen reached new business, she quickly stated, seeing no new business items submitted in advance, we will move to adjourn. Point of order, I said clearly, standing with the green folder in hand. Section 5.3 of the bylaws specifically allows for new business to be introduced from the floor with support from 5 homeowners. Karen's eyes narrowed. That provision is rarely used and I have 12 homeowners prepared to support this motion, I continued evenly. Behind me, 11 residents stood in silent solidarity. We wish to address a matter of community governance. The room grew utterly silent. Karen gripped the edges of the podium. Proceed, you have 3 minutes. Thank you. I opened the green folder and placed my materials on the table. I would like to address a pattern of selective enforcement and procedural irregularities that has developed within our HOA governance structure. I began methodically presenting our evidence. First, the statistical analysis showing discriminatory enforcement patterns. Then, documented cases where identical violations received wildly different consequences depending on who committed them. Finally, instances where Karen had issued violations without board approval, contrary to bylaws. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady despite Karen's increasingly hostile glare, we have documented 17 instances where homeowners were denied proper appeals procedures explicitly guaranteed in Section 7 of our community charter. Karen banged her gavel. Your 3 minutes are up. Point of order, called Frank from the back. The bylaws allow 10 minutes for presentations involving community welfare concerns. Karen's face flushed. This is becoming disruptive. Perhaps in your previous living situations, this behavior was acceptable, but in Oak Ridge Estates. I would like to directly address that comment, I interjected, my voice cutting through her familiar refrain. For months, you have repeatedly referred to me as a renter despite correction, implied I came from an apartment complex despite having no knowledge of my housing history, and suggested I do not belong in this community. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several neighbors nodded in recognition of the pattern. You are out of order, Karen snapped, banging her gavel again. Actually, said Mrs. Rodriguez, standing now, he is precisely in order, and I would like to add my experience to the record. She detailed the wheelchair ramp incident as others nodded in solidarity. One by one, residents rose to share their experiences. The young couple spoke about their door color harassment, the Chens about their garden restrictions, and Frank about his bird feeder. Each story built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern. Karen's composure cracked. Who do you think you are? She demanded, pointing directly at me. You move into our community and immediately start causing trouble. You have no idea how things work here. The moment had arrived. I reached for the red folder. Actually, Karen, I understand exactly how things work, both in this community and in mortgage financing. My voice remained calm. I am the senior loan officer at First National Mortgage, the same institution that holds the loans on all 4 of your properties. The color drained from Karen's face. The other board members exchanged alarmed glances. As part of my professional responsibilities, I regularly review loan portfolios for compliance and accuracy. I placed several redacted documents on the table. During a standard review, some concerning discrepancies came to light regarding your mortgage applications. Karen stumbled back from the podium. You cannot. That is private information. You have no right. I have every professional right to review loans in my portfolio, I clarified, and I have an obligation to report discrepancies. The documents here are appropriately redacted but show clear patterns of income misrepresentation and asset overvaluation across multiple applications. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Karen looked frantically at the other board members, but they were staring at the documents on the table. This is not about personal revenge, I stated clearly for everyone to hear. This is about restoring proper governance to our community and ensuring that rules are enforced fairly and accurately, just as financial regulations must be followed accurately. I returned to our prepared statement. Our petition, signed by 26 households, calls for an immediate special election under Section 8 of the Charter. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for equal treatment under the clearly established rules. Karen's shoulders slumped as she realized the position she was in. The gavel slipped from her hand, clattering loudly in the silent room. One board member, Dr. Miller, finally spoke up. I believe we should proceed with the special election as requested. The evidence presented certainly warrants review. The vote was quick and decisive. The special election would be held in 2 weeks. An interim review committee would examine all outstanding violations and the enforcement process. As the meeting adjourned, residents gathered in small groups, talking animatedly. Karen sat alone at the podium, staring at nothing in particular. For a moment, I felt a twinge of empathy. She had built her perceived power on intimidation and financial overreach. Now both had crumbled simultaneously. Walking to my car, I was stopped repeatedly by neighbors introducing themselves, some apologizing for their silence during my months of harassment. The community was already beginning to transform. The bank's investigation proceeded exactly as it would for any client with financial discrepancies. I properly recused myself from direct involvement while ensuring the process followed standard protocols without exceptional harshness or leniency. The findings confirmed what I had discovered. Karen had significantly misrepresented her income and assets across multiple applications. Rather than immediately calling the loans or pursuing foreclosure, the bank offered Karen a structured remediation plan. She would need to sell 2 of her investment properties to bring her debt-to-income ratio back within acceptable parameters and place the remaining loans under enhanced monitoring. It was firm but fair, the same treatment any client would receive under similar circumstances. The special HOA election drew record community participation. Nearly 90% of homeowners cast votes, resulting in a completely new board with Dr. Miller as interim president. Karen did not attend. My first action as a regular community member was to propose a governance review committee to examine and update the bylaws. The committee would focus on creating clear, objective standards for violations, implementing a transparent appeals process, and ensuring consistent enforcement regardless of who was involved. Spring arrived with remarkable changes throughout Oak Ridge Estates. The Rodriguez family installed their wheelchair ramp with the full support of the new board. Frank reinstalled his bird feeder, now surrounded by additional feeders from neighbors who shared his passion for birdwatching. The community newsletter, once filled with violation warnings, now highlighted neighborhood achievements and volunteer opportunities. I often reflected on the moral complexity of the situation. Had I crossed an ethical line by using my professional knowledge in a personal dispute? I consulted with both the bank's ethics officer and my own conscience. The conclusion was nuanced but clear. I had maintained proper procedures while fulfilling my professional obligation to report discrepancies. The timing was certainly influenced by personal factors, but the actions themselves were procedurally sound. Karen sold her 2 investment properties as required. She remained in her primary residence, now much quieter and rarely seen at community events. I made a point of treating her with professional courtesy whenever our paths crossed, neither seeking confrontation nor avoiding appropriate neighborly interaction. The true resolution came 6 months later at the summer community barbecue. The event drew nearly every household, with children playing on the newly renovated playground and neighbors chatting comfortably across former social divides. The atmosphere was relaxed and genuinely welcoming. As I helped serve ice cream, Frank approached with a surprising suggestion. The nominating committee is preparing for next year's board election. Several people have recommended you for president. I smiled but shook my head. I think I can better serve on the ethics committee. Leadership should rotate to prevent exactly what happened before. Later that evening, I noticed Karen standing alone by the clubhouse entrance, watching the festivities with an unreadable expression. Making a decision, I filled a plate with food and walked over. "Would you like to join the gathering?" I asked, offering the plate. "There is plenty of room." She hesitated, genuine surprise crossing her face. "Why would you invite me after everything that happened?" "Because that is what neighbors do," I replied simply. "Communities work best when everyone belongs, regardless of differences." Karen accepted the plate without further comment. She did not join the main gathering but sat at a distant table where, eventually, Frank and his wife tentatively joined her. The transformation was not about revenge or humiliation.